G'day, mate. 40 here. We seem to have an active shooter situation in my neighborhood each of the last 2 days. A Jewish man has been shot and killed. But not shot. No one's been killed. So forgive me if I am a little bit rattled. Let's get a report here.
Separate attacks on 2 Orthodox Jews. They were both shot while leaving synagogues in the Pico-Robertson area within 24 hours.
Both victims survived the attacks. KTLA's Jennifer McGraw is live with the latest. Jennifer.
Sharon, Sandy, LAPD just releasing a press release just moments ago saying that they do believe, in fact, both shootings were related to one suspect. That is the very latest from the LAPD. We're in this neighborhood, you know, and there's a lot of confusion, obviously, a lot of concern about both of these shootings targeting Jewish people, and want this person caught. Helicopters overhead this Pico-Robertson neighborhood searching for possibly 2 shooters wanted for gunning down 2 Jewish men. The first shooting happened Wednesday morning at 8:20 on Shenandoah near Pico. A man was shot while leaving the synagogue. And the second day, just 2 blocks away, another man shot after leaving prayer.
This is a horrific hate crime. We have to find the criminals who perpetrated this act.
Police are investigating the relation of the 2, but to the Jewish community, they say the motive seems to be clear.
Who else would come out and specifically shoot someone coming from a synagogue, coming out of a synagogue at a time of prayer?
This, I feel, was targeted because they didn't ask for anything. Somebody just came out of the bushes, shot him, and ran away.
Vivian Eisenstadt lives nearby and spoke with one of the victims, who is well known around here.
He is really being very Jewish about it, very grateful. He keeps saying it's a miracle that nothing happened to him and that it was just a through and through, and you know, he just wants to move on, but he's just really grateful. He keeps calling it a miracle that both of them were through and throughs and didn't cause people to die.
But 2 in 2 days, Rabbi David Barron of Temple of the Arts says more needs to be done to protect our religious communities. He says many temples and synagogues have already been beefing up security.
It's incomprehensible to me. We can't live in a state of fear, and we can't allow these acts to create an environment of fear and restriction from our freedom to worship.
And police are still interviewing witnesses and looking through possible surveillance video to help lead to the arrest of this suspect. Anyone with any information should contact police. As for police presence, because of this situation, there will be a heightened security around the area. That's the very latest. We are.
Okay, so traffic is obviously disrupted, helicopters, police all over the place. A lot of people have a hard time getting home to Beverly Hills, West LA, Pico-Robertson this evening. So second Orthodox Jewish man shot in 2 days in my neighborhood. Apparently the suspect is a white guy, and apparently the same suspect for both attacks. All right, Jewish Federation says no indication that either incident is a hate crime. Well, that's good to know. So the first shooting occurred Wednesday morning near the intersection of Shenandoah and Cascio Streets. So after this Orthodox Jewish man was coming out of synagogue, second shooting took place 24 hours later this morning near Pickford and South Bedford, about 2 blocks away. So the first shooting happened 10 a.m. Wednesday. Man in his 40s was shot in the back while walking to his vehicle. Second shooting happened this morning at 8:30 a.m. A Orthodox Jewish man was walking home, got shot in the arm. Both victims are alive, described seeing male shooting suspects and a sedan. Let's have a look here. Jewish Journal. Suspect is still at large, apparently driving an older model Hyundai sedan that's either black or brown. So victims are in stable condition. So white man wearing a black mask, black glasses, and a black sweater, armed with a 9mm handgun. And so the older model Hyundai sedan, either black or brown. So very unusual to have, Jewish men shot in Los Angeles, particularly in West Los Angeles. And this situation reminds me a little bit about the balloon story. Like, why did the balloon story just capture our imagination? Okay, the head Rabbi Aryeh Safran, who heads this modern Orthodox Yeshiva University Los Angeles high school, says that the high school is currently under a shelter in place as a precautionary measure. Students can't leave campus. But this story reminds me a bit about the balloon story. So the Great Spy Balloon Freakout New York Times articles, right? These are not a safe time to be a weather balloon. So Joe Biden is now admitting that U.S. military using very expensive equipment was shooting down things that were probably completely innocuous. The last 3 knockdowns, so maybe weather balloon, something like that. But why did we soar into some kind of full-blown balloon freakout? Right? Why did we go from 0 to oh my God so quickly? Because we are instinctively wired to worry about new risks and risks with a lot of uncertainty. So having, a gunman in the neighborhood, targeting Jewish men, Orthodox Jewish men, yeah, it's kind of an unprecedented situation in my neighborhood. Yes, I plan to go out for Sabbath. I plan to go to synagogue. But I mean, this is also a pragmatic community. So if for some reason we're told to shelter in place, we will shelter in place. I can't imagine that we'll be told to stay home. So apparently Ethan Ralph just got swatted by Mexican police. Thoughts and prayers for Ethan?
No. Yes. They call because they think it's funny because they know I'm on the air. And they think it's funny to see you guys come in here and mess with me. Yeah, it's live right now.
Okay, are you a YouTuber?
Yeah, I'm a YouTuber, yeah.
What is your page?
Well, I'm banned off official YouTube, but I could write it down maybe for you. Cozy.tv/Ethan Ralph. Yeah, I'm a YouTuber. That's what I do for a living, though, YouTube. They call in pranks and stuff to try to, get me in trouble.
So, right now, I think that you better get tipsy, okay? So are you smoking to the weed a little bit? Or maybe use drugs?
So allegations that Ethan Ralph was under the influence. So trying to stay on top of the shootings in my neighborhood of Orthodox Jewish men.
Good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson Tonight. We haven't taken a poll, but it's possible on this Thursday evening you may be wondering what the hell is going on in our country. There are so many unanswered questions, some of them lingering. How, for example, did senile hermit Joe Biden get 15 million more votes than his former boss, rock star crowd?
Primarily interested about what's going on in my neighborhood.
Fear and concern in LA's largely Jewish Pico-Robertson neighborhood tonight after 2 consecutive shootings of Orthodox Jewish men in as many days.
Fox 11's Phil Schuman is there live. Phil, what did we just find out?
Well, we know that both shooting victims were approached by a gunman as they walked on the sidewalk here in the residential area south of Pico, leaving Orthodox synagogues, 2 of many in the area. Police initially said the suspects had 2 different descriptions, but now they're saying they believe it's the same man they're looking for in both shootings. This morning's shooting happened outside the Orthodox Jewish synagogue on Pico, known as the Pinto Center. The victim, a man in his 70s, was walking towards his car when a gunman, a white man in a black mask, shot him and drove off in an older model Hyundai.
It's definitely nerve-wracking. It's very scary.
Rabbi Avi Gruen works at the Pinto Center, grew up in this Pico-Robertson neighborhood.
I don't remember any other time in the past where we've had people in the community being shot at, especially leaving synagogue. So it's for sure definitely a lot of people are nervous about it.
You ever feel like a target because you're Jewish?
Not so much, but maybe now. In general, you feel pretty safe walking around here.
Not anymore. Yesterday morning, another shooting outside one of the many synagogues on Pico. Another Orthodox Jew, a man in his 40s, shot by a suspect described as an Asian male with a mustache. No vehicle description.
There aren't enough cops in the area, so we have to be fully
aware
of what's going on.
For now, the LAPD says the two shootings are not related, not necessarily hate crimes, which Vivian Eisenstadt says seems ridiculous. Eisenstadt lives in the neighborhood, is in the process of getting her CCW, a permit to carry a concealed weapon.
They're not stealing anything, and they're not holding them up for anything. They're just randomly shooting them and then jumping into cars. So what else could you deduce from that?
Other than that Jewish people are being targeted.
Yes.
Jew haters, one area resident said that's the best way to describe it. Now, again, since we recorded that story, Alex and Christine, the police literally within the past few minutes, as you mentioned, have updated that information to say that they believe the same suspect described as an Asian man with a mustache is the shooter in both instances, but no details on the vehicle. There are many cameras out on Pico, of course, and some in residential areas here, no doubt aiding detectives in their investigation. Major Crimes has taken over. The mayor's office is aware. The ADL is issuing a statement of concern, and the LAPD says they will be increasing patrols in this area immediately. Live in Pico.
Okay, so some of the more hysterical approaches to events like this, say, oh, Jewish lives are so cheap, but since World War II, Jewish lives have been incredibly expensive. So Jews enjoy the most prosperity and safety that we've ever had in all of 4,000 years of Jewish history, essentially living in the United States today. So initially the description was a white guy, now an Asian guy, and what the heck is going on here? So think about the balloon story and then think about this story. How do these threats go from zero to, oh my God, so quickly? Because we're instinctively wired to worry about new risks and risks with a lot of uncertainty. This is New York Times column that I just read. So these floating balloons are being referred to as unidentified aerial objects. Officials admit they don't know if more of them are out there, so we tend to worry more about risks that remind us of things that we've already learned to fear, such as getting shot or nuclear war. Spy balloon comes amidst growing tension between the United States and China. Also, we have a new right-wing government in Israel that's highly unpopular around the world. Whatever goes on in the Jewish state is going to have repercussions to Jews walking down the street in Australia, Argentina, Brazil, France, Germany, England, all over the world. So the Chinese spy balloons that many people have been freaking out about, very much remind me from my history readings about 1957 when the Soviet Union launched Sputnik 1. That was a metal ball with 4 antennae transmitting weak signals into space, the first human-made satellite. And many Americans were all scanning the skies and worrying, just as many of us in West LA, Beverly Hills, Pico-Robertson are like, where the heck is this shooter? During World War II, Japanese meteorologists tapped the jet stream to float 9,300 balloons with anti-personnel bombs and incendiary devices toward Alaska and the West Coast. They wanted to set the Northwest ablaze. About 300 of them landed, mostly in damp forest, did little damage. Now, the balloon freakout taps into our fear and our fascination with the prospect of aliens paying Earth a visit. So these unidentified anomalous phenomena, that's what the Pentagon are referring to these UFO devices, unidentified aerial phenomena. And the key word is unidentified, mysterious. We don't know what these three things were that were shut down, where they came from, what they were doing. So we tend to worry more about risks. The less we understand them, the less empowered we feel to protect ourselves. So if you're bothered by something, you can finally give it a name. Like I had really bad health when I was 21, 22. Once I was able to give a name to it, chronic fatigue syndrome, I immediately kind of relaxed inside. At least it had a name. So risk perception fuels our fears. And also people in the news business and people in social media realize that what worries us gets our attention. So by blaring alerts and hyping the worry, the news media and social media people can heighten awareness and further brighten the blip on our emotional risk radar. So we end up over-fearing some things that arouse psychological fear, and we also sometimes dangerously under-fear other things. We tend to, generally speaking, act, operate, live in the world without an accurate level of awareness of how dangerous the world around us is. So we also comfortably engage many risks that worry us less because we take them on voluntarily, like smoking or texting and driving. So this is from a retired Harvard instructor, the author of How Risky Is It Really? Why Our Fears Don't Always Match the Facts.
Surfer Barack Obama. Results like that would seem to defy the laws of known physics and qualify instead as a miracle. Was the 2020 election a miracle? Honestly, we don't know. We don't expect to get an answer to it tonight. So let's move instead to more immediate questions, like all these weird things shooting through the sky.
Okay, there was nothing weird about Joe Biden's victory in 2020. There was a 2% swing against Donald Trump in the suburbs, and that accounted both for the Democrats' successful 2018 midterm elections, also for their 2020 presidential triumph.
Over the United States and Canada that nobody seems able to positively identify. Should we be worried about these things? And then what about our infrastructure? The steel and concrete parts of America that the Biden administration has shown strange contempt for, possibly because they were built by those dreaded white construction workers that Mayor Pete dislikes so much. Our critical infrastructure appears to be falling apart. Is that a problem? Or can we, in the bright new transhumanist future our leaders envision, feed ourselves with McKinsey consultants alone? And if we can, how do they taste? You may be wondering all of this, or maybe you're not wondering any of it because you have no clue what we're talking about because the media hasn't told you about it. A press corps that's willing to spend a full week ignoring a toxic mushroom cloud over Ohio will ignore pretty much anything. So in case you're not up to date, here's a partial recap of events. Last night, there was a massive and as yet unexplained fire at a plant nursery just south of Orlando. The fire burned more than 2 acres of plastic planters. Now, burning plastic releases a lot of bad chemicals, including dioxins, which you don't want, and that's why you don't do this in your fireplace. When a single plastic beaker melted in Stanford's science building last year, the school evacuated the area.
Okay, here's a thread from journalist Louis Keene. And yeah, I've been to all these places. I'm familiar with these streets and these synagogues. I'm familiar with Louis Keene, and his mother's a journalism instructor. Second day in a row that someone has been shot in Pico-Robertson on their way home from synagogue. Today's victim is at the scene telling officers what happened. Judging by the number of cops, a couple of dozen shootings are likely to be investigated as connected. Both were drive-by shootings of Jewish men 2 blocks apart. The FBI is not currently involved. First news truck has arrived. Today's shooting occurred here at the intersection of Pickford and Bedford. Surrounding blocks have been cordoned off. Now we got an officer from the LAPD saying the incidents are not related because they are a different car. Hyundai today versus Honda yesterday. Different suspect description, white male versus Asian male. Neither shooting is being investigated as a hate crime. Detective in person says it's too early to say whether the incidents are connected. Could not confirm that it was a Hyundai used today and not a Honda. Different officers at the scene either saying they can't confirm what make the car was or they can't share that. Police are not going anywhere. Everything we know. 2 men were walking home from prayer services. Right, here's a map detailing just how close the 2 shootings were to each other, less than 24 hours apart. So I've walked these streets hundreds of times. Okay, no car identified in the first shooting, car in the second incident is a Hyundai. Police narrative on the Pico-Robertson shootings has changed multiple times over the course of the day. Anything regarding whether this incident was a hate crime, or whether the incidents are connected, or even the suspect description should be considered subject to change. Now the LAPD news release says detectives believe the Pico-Robertson shootings may have involved the same suspect. Now he's described as a male Asian with a mustache and a goatee driving a possible white compact vehicle. confirmed now. Same car, same gun. Investigation is now in the hands of the LAPD Major Crimes Division. So definitely keep an eye on what's happening in my neighborhood.
But outside Orlando, there was no evacuation. Residents were told to stay in their homes. None of the environmentalists in the Biden administration, the people who claim ostentatiously to care about the environment, said anything about it. Nor did they have a lot to say about what happened in Tucson on Tuesday. A tractor trailer carrying nitric acid rolled over on I-10. Nitric acid is a carcinogen. Within 2 hours of the crash, authorities evacuated a small number of residents. They told everybody living within a mile to shelter in place. Then 2 hours after that, they lifted the shelter-in-place order. But then the next morning, authorities announced that they had, quote, reinstated the shelter-in-place order for a 1-mile perimeter around the incident. And then they told residents to, quote, turn off heaters and or air conditioning systems that bring in outside air. Ooh, outside air. No air for you. Well, why did they give this order? Because the first order, it turns out, was wrong. It wasn't safe for people to move back into their homes. So just as in East Palestine, Ohio, authorities, for whatever reason, expose people to dangerous chemicals. If this is incompetence, there seems to be an awful lot of it lately. Then today, it nearly happened again. A freight train derailed about 30 miles west of downtown Detroit. It's a Norfolk Southern train. That's the same company that operated the train that derailed in East Palestine, Ohio. 30 cars went off the tracks. Fortunately, if the information that we are getting tonight is accurate, and we can't vouch that it is, the car containing liquid chlorine did not overturn, apparently.
So much of the information about these shootings in my neighborhood is here on Twitter. Right, second day in a row, someone's been shot on their way home. Right, Jonathan Greenblatt of the ADL is extending his thoughts and prayers. Jewish media's all over it. Apparently, same suspect. ADL Los Angeles has spoken out. Okay, ABC 7. LAPD needs help tracking down 2 suspects responsible for shootings of 2 Jewish men on their way home from synagogue in Pico-Robertson. So there are more Jewish properties targeted in this area, one of the most heavily Jewish in America. This video shows a suspect throwing cinder blocks into a Jewish-owned office next to a kosher supermarket Club Mart near Pico and Robertson. For years, I've been begging Jewish Angelenos to invest in a local paper that actually covers L.A. It's been hours since a Jewish man was shot in Pico-Robertson. So this is, one of the most visible Jewish neighborhoods, like one of the top 2 visibly Jewish neighborhoods, maybe the number 1 Jewishly visible neighborhood in California. So the suspects who committed these shootings still at large. Thank God Jonathan Greenblatt's heart is with the Jewish community in Pico-Robertson. And good to know people are closely monitoring these incidents.
So that is, however you slice it, an awful lot of drama on our roads and rails in a single week. Who's in charge of our roads and rails anyway? Well, that would be the Secretary of Transportation. That would be Pete Buttigieg. He's in charge. He was asked about it today. In response, he pointed out that train derailments are not a big deal. Settle down. They're very common. Train derailments happen on average nearly 3 times every day.
Look, rail safety is something that has evolved a lot over the years, but there's clearly more that needs to be done because while this horrible situation has gotten a particularly high amount of attention, there are roughly 1,000 cases a year of a train derailing.
Wait a second. You think East Palestine is a big deal? 1,000 trains derail every year in the United States, says Pete Buttigieg. who presumably has the stats on it. Did you know that? Are you okay with 1,000 trains a year derailing in your country? Don't a lot of these trains carry highly dangerous chemicals through highly populated areas? Yeah. So if you were Pete Buttigieg, put yourself in his tiny position for a moment. If you were him, wouldn't fixing that, this ongoing disaster, be your very first priority? Well, of course it would be, but you're not Pete Buttigieg. Pete Buttigieg doesn't care about trains derailing. He cares about equity. Trains derailing, that's fine. You're fine. You're so fine that the people who show up to test the air and the water after a train derailment are wearing hazmat suits, because the air and water are perfectly safe as long as you're wearing a hazmat suit. See? There's a simple solution to this. Stop whining. Now, what does Norfolk Southern think of all this? We'd love to know, but we don't know because the company skipped the town hall last night in East Palestine, Ohio. Hundreds of locals had gathered to ask obvious and, for them, pressing questions like, why are thousands of fish and animals dying?
Okay, let's try to turn things in a more positive direction. Just listening to the New Yorker profiler Salman Rushdie. Salman Rushdie is still defiant, guys, and he will not be stopped. So it just suddenly struck me, like, why is this such a familiar genre? Won't be stopped. There's a whole genre of news, won't be stopped. You know, the plucky underdog who won't be stopped. All right, so 3 keys. I just put won't be stopped in quotes into Google News. 3 keys to Minnesota beating Penn State. Guys, Minnesota won't be stopped. Anti-union laws won't be stopped. Chinese boorishness will continue if they won't be stopped. Statement from the Philippines. Out of Florida, people who want to do harm to others won't be stopped by the gun permit requirement. Should the law stop Lydia Thorpe from jumping ship? Her departure from the Green Party in Australia, the Greens, won't be stopped. I work in a law firm and still wear micro mini skirts. It's a bad habit, but I won't be stopped. What a courageous young woman. I mean, she's willing to admit that it's a bad habit, but she won't be stopped. Right? Maybe we can learn from her. Right?
Bite my tongue, it's bad.
Whoa. Even though I have a job in the legal field, I still wear my micro mini skirts. Victoria admits she still wears micro mini skirts to work at a law firm. She doesn't plan on stopping. These bloody ads from The Sun won't stop either. She posted a risque video to her TikTok admitting her bad habit, so she may sport a business look on top, but her bottoms are a bit more trendy. Can't be stopped. Powerful. We can all learn from Victoria. She won't be stopped. May we all benefit from her courage. 10 reasons why ESG, so equity and other good things, sustainable stuff, ESG, 10 reasons why ESG won't be stopped, guys. Biden's student debt relief plan won't be stopped by the GOP. Inspiring young entrepreneur won't be stopped. America's favorite show, Yellowstone, won't be stopped. Indiana Pacers guard Tyrese Halliburton won't be stopped by more defensive attention. Sergeant Michael Bloom won't be stopped. I know a Michael Bloom. Okay, but it's not that Michael Bloom. Anyway, it won't be stopped. American Jews won't be stopped from traveling to Ukraine for Rosh Hashanah. Black women have always moved this country forward on Election Day. We won't be stopped. The Dark Knight won't be stopped. Jalea Williams, a female basketball player, won't be stopped. Bomb cyclone. Santa Claus won't be stopped by a bomb cyclone. Stephen Cohen, owner of the New York Mets, he won't be stopped as Major League Baseball tries to slow his Mets ambition. Okay, Big Bash League. All right, cricket, T20 cricket in Australia. New COVID rules mean players won't be stopped from playing. Elden Ring speedrunners won't be stopped by a nerf. NATO expansion won't be stopped by Turkey. Kremlin won't be if the Kremlin are not stopped in Ukraine, guys. Here are next to Baltic states and then Poland. Security expert. Cancer care won't be stopped in the United Kingdom for nurse strikes. Greg Norman says that his new golf league won't be stopped. Cristiano Ronaldo says he won't be stopped from doing explosive interview. Some project in India won't be stopped. The green hydrogen revolution has started and it won't be stopped. Climate change won't be stopped by 593 pages of green tape. Bobcat won't be stopped by a pandemic. Users of Microsoft Office won't be stopped from connecting to Microsoft 365 if they have older software. The John Basilone Memorial Parade, right? He's an American war hero in World War II, won't be stopped. Insolent Britain won't be stopped by people who think you can grow concrete. Okay, Hamilton, right? Lewis Hamilton has vowed that Mercedes will not be stopped in our tracks. She's a Wonder won't be stopped. That's a horse. Sasha Banks from The Mandalorian won't be stopped. Charlie Worsham won't be stopped in new song Fist Through This Town. California flash mob robbers won't be stopped. Biden says Iran won't be stopped with no credible military option. Work won't be stopped on Mercedes-Benz cars. There's no silver bullet to solve the Channel migrant crisis, the channel between Europe and the United Kingdom. The Green Revolution, once again, has started. Guys, it won't be stopped. Why go to Ukraine for Rosh Hashanah? Don't understand the connection between the holy day and Ukraine. So why do so many Jews go to Ukraine for Rosh Hashanah? It has to do with tradition, history. And they won't be stopped, guys.
На жаль, ми вимушені вакуумом покрити цю інформацію, тому що ми розуміємо, що є повномасштабне вторгнення Росії до України, і ворог моніторить інформацію.
Okay. Hasidic Jewish pilgrims celebrate Rosh Hashanah in Ukraine. Won't be stopped. So Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty is funded by the American government. These Jews won't be stopped. Okay. Also looked up the defiance of. So New Yorker's got a long article, The Defiance of Salman Rushdie. So the defiance of, put it into quotes into Google News, Black Joy as Black Resistance, LeBron James, and the defiance of complacency, competitive as F, top 5 iconic Black Olympians. Polish officials denounce European community taking Poland to the EU top court. EC, I don't know EC. The beauty and terror of skiing. That's the defiance of traversing a mountain. Israeli government legalizes 9 outposts. U.S. still in dark over mystery flying objects. The defiance of international law. So, a lot of defiance, right? People are not going to be stopped. They're just filled with defiance. And I'm here to cover the resistance. I'd like to think that we're all part of the resistance. And this community, may I dare say it, we won't be stopped. Right? The defiance of Salman Rushdie. Salman Rushdie, guys, he won't be stopped. Right, this is a New Yorker article.
Profiles. Published in the print issue of The New Yorker with the headline, Defiance. Despite a near-fatal stabbing and decades of death threats, Salman Rushdie won't stop telling stories. Written by David Remnick.
I don't know about you, but I'm a little tired of this journalistic genre. So-and-so won't be stopped, right? She won't be stopped wearing micro miniskirts. Salman Rushdie won't be stopped telling stories. Did you realize that Salman Rushdie made some, major apology for the things he wrote in Satanic Verses and absolutely groveled before the Ayatollahs? But didn't really work. Anyway, the defiance of Salman Rushdie, he won't stop telling stories, guys.
Narrated by Vikas Adam. When Salman Rushdie turned 75 last summer, he had every reason to believe that he had outlasted the threat of assassination. A long time ago, on Valentine's Day, 1989, Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini, declared Rushdie's novel, The Satanic Verses, blasphemous and issued a fatwa ordering the execution of its author and all those involved in its publication. Rushdie, a resident of London, spent the next decade in a fugitive existence, under constant police protection. But after settling in New York in 2000, he lived freely, insistently unguarded. He refused to be terrorized.
So I was just thinking, just imagine them doing a story like that about Tucker Carlson. Tucker Carlson won't back down, right? He won't be stopped. He refuses to be terrorized. Or imagine them doing a story like that about Rush Limbaugh or, I don't know, Jared Taylor or Peter Brimlow or Heather McDonald or Amy Wax. Amy Wax won't back down. She won't be stopped. She refuses to be terrorized. But it's always plucky people on the left who won't back down, won't stop telling their stories, singing their songs, wearing their micro miniskirts.
There were times, though, when the lingering threat made itself apparent, and not merely on the lunatic reaches of the internet. In 2012, during the annual autumn gathering of world leaders at the United Nations, I joined a small meeting of reporters with Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, the president of Iran, and I asked him if...
Just imagine if the Southern Poverty Law Center or, what are these other, anti-racist organizations, Hope Not Hate issues fatwa against Jared Taylor. I mean, that would be terrible. God forbid. They never do such thing. The good people at Hope Not Hate and the Southern Poverty Law Center, they never do such a thing. And you're probably thinking, that would be funny as F, man. The Southern Poverty Law Center and Hope Not Hate started, pronouncing fatwas against racists or, people who had more ethnic pride than is socially acceptable, people who had stronger in-group identities than is socially acceptable. And you're thinking, that would be funny, man. That would not be funny. That would be illegal. That would be morally heinous. And the good people in these anti-hate, anti-racism organizations would never do such a thing. So don't even compare them to the Ayatollahs of Iran.
Multi-million-dollar bounty that an Iranian foundation had placed on Rushdie's head had been rescinded. Ahmadinejad smiled with a glint of malice. Salman Rushdie, where is he now? He said. There is no news of him. Is he in the United States? If he is in the U.S., you shouldn't broadcast that for his own safety.
Wow, that'd be absolutely unfathomable if Hope Not Hate or the Southern Poverty Law Center or some other, left-wing anti-racism, anti-hate, some Antifa organization started speaking that way. That would never happen, right? Because people with strong in-group identities won't be stopped. We continue to live in defiance. Hope not hate won't be stopped. The defiance of the in-group identity.
Within a year, Ahmadinejad was out of office and out of favor with the mullahs. Rushdie went on living as a free man. The years passed. He wrote book after book, taught, lectured, traveled, met with readers, married, divorced, and became a fixture in the city that was his adopted home. If he ever felt the need for some vestige of anonymity, he wore a baseball cap. Recalling his first few months in New
Yeah, just imagine them doing a story like this about Tucker Carlson or Jared Taylor. If he ever needed anonymity, he walked around with a baseball cap because he would not be stopped.
New York, Rushdie told me, people were scared to be around me. I thought the only way I can stop that is to behave as if I'm not scared. I have to show them there's nothing to be scared about. One night, he went out to dinner with Andrew Wiley, his agent and friend at Nick.
So operating as though there's nothing to be scared of, sometimes a good strategy, sometimes a bad strategy. Right? Best to live in reality and have an appropriate level of fear. Right. Lewis Hamilton says nothing will stop him from speaking out after new rules have been imposed about clamping down on political statements. So thank God, Lewis Hamilton, the great racing car driver for Mercedes, he will not be stopped.
Tony's, an extravagantly conspicuous restaurant in East Hampton. The painter, Eric Fischel, stopped by their table and said, "Shouldn't we all be afraid and leave the restaurant?" "Well, I'm having dinner," Rushdie replied. "You can do what you like." Fischel hadn't meant to offend, but sometimes there was a tone of derision in press accounts of Rushdie's indefatigable presence on the New York nightlife scene, as Laura M. Holson put it in the Times. Some people thought he should have adopted a more austere posture toward his predicament. Would Solzhenitsyn have gone on stage with Bono or danced the night away at Mumbai?
Chat says, Forty's hair makes him look like an Ellen DeGeneres type lesbian. Thank you. Mandatory haircut every 30 days, bro. Well, I'm under attack here, man. Like Orthodox Jewish men are getting shot in my neighborhood. I didn't have time to put water on the old hair, slick it back. Right? I'm under attack, bro.
For Rushdie, keeping a low profile would be capitulation. He was a social being and would live as he pleased. He even tried to render the fatwa ridiculous. 6 years ago, he played himself in an episode of Curb Your Enthusiasm in which Larry David provokes threats from Iran for mocking the Ayatollah while promoting his upcoming production, Fatwa the Musical. David is terrified, but Rushdie's character assures him that life under an edict of execution, though it can be scary, also makes a man alluring to women. It's not exactly you, it's the fatwa wrapped around you, like sexy pixie dust, he says. With every public gesture, it appeared, Rushdie was determined to show that he would not merely survive, but flourish, at his desk and on the town. There was no such thing as absolute security, he wrote in his third-person memoir, Joseph Anton, published in 2012. There were only varying degrees of insecurity. He would have to learn to live with that. He well understood that his demise would not require the coordinated efforts of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps or Hezbollah. A cracked loner could easily do the job. But I had come to feel that it was a very long time ago and that the world moves on, he told me. In September 2021, Rushdie married the poet and novelist Rachel Eliza Griffiths, whom he'd met 6 years earlier.
Okay, so Salman Rushdie, right, doesn't share our politics. He's not exactly a big fan of Western civilization. He's definitely a man of the left, big anti-racism crusader. But I think we have to stand with Salman, right? You can't allow outside groups to shut down freedom of speech. It's like when I played soccer, right? Sometimes I made an errant tackle, but no one's ever gotten up and choked me. But friends of mine playing soccer with, let's say, out groups, right, making an elementary tackle, and suddenly, this immigrant will get up and just choke you out. So civilization has to maintain standards, and one of the standards of Western civilization is that we don't murder people for what they say. So however loathsome I find Salman Rushdie's politics, all right, I support freedom of speech, and I do not support importing people who, stab people and shoot people and try to kill people for things that they say.
Why? But executives at Norfolk Southern didn't show up at the event. Why? Because they were worried for their own safety.
Because they're scared for their safety. Hundreds of anxious residents packed a school gym here in East Palestine on Wednesday night, looking for answers almost 2 weeks after a huge train derailment released hazardous chemicals into their town, contaminating much of the surrounding area. But there were notable absences from the town hall meeting, including the rail operator, Norfolk Southern. Also not attending, Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg. The mayor says he's had limited contact with the White House, leaving folks here frustrated, angry, and complaining about a lack of information from the feds and Norfolk Southern. State officials and the EPA say the water and air are both safe, but residents here tell a different story. They say they've been getting sick, and so have their pets.
It's so safe, we're not going there. Our oxygen tanks are empty, and by the way, they're...
Okay, sounds like a good time to reflect on the temptations of Carl Schmitt.
Even as he began delivering lectures in Munich, the first general elections of the Reich saw the Weimar coalition immediately lose their majority, illuminating the shaky foundations of the Republic. The challenge facing Germany, as Schmitt increasingly saw it, stemmed directly from the weakness engendered by the hesitancy of liberal proceduralism and parliamentary government. At the end of the summer of 1920, Schmitt had, not coincidentally, finished one of his first major works, Dictatorship, which would be published in early 1921. In it, he explores the history of dictatorship, from its original Roman usage to the wartime state of siege used in Germany during the war. In doing so, he lays out an important distinction between two forms of dictatorship: a commissary dictatorship, in which a dictator is chosen and granted special powers in order to defend the existing constitutional structure of the state, and a sovereign dictatorship, in which a dictator uses his powers to wholly replace the constitution. Either way, to Schmitt, a dictatorship can be democratically legitimate if it fulfills the state's obligation to protect, even if it acts beyond the law in making necessary decisions, given that, as he would later explain elsewhere, the endeavor of a normal state consists above all in assuring total peace within the state and its territory. To create tranquility, security, and order, and thereby establish the normal situation, is the prerequisite for legal norms to be valid. Every norm presupposes a normal situation, and no norm can be valid in an entirely abnormal situation. In theory, the dictator reestablishes the normal situation, and therefore legal norms. What Schmitt was most interested in at this time, however, was the broader concept of sovereignty. Who is truly sovereign? Who is the one who actually has the power to decide to act? The answer he settled on, first in Dictatorship, and then more directly in Political Theology, published in 1922, would become one of his most famous lines: "Sovereign is he who decides the exception."
Okay, we're in an exceptional state in my neighborhood right now, with a gunman on the loose, 2 Orthodox Jewish men shot in the past 2 days. But who decides the state of exception? All right, coronavirus came along, and suddenly we were in a state of exception where many rights that we took for granted were just taken away. But then when people wanted to go out and protest against police violence and anti-racism, then, all right, all those rights were restored. So you got your rights back if you were participating in, like, left-wing terrorist protest. So overturning the rule of law. What was amazing about the Black Lives Matter Antifa reign of terror that launched in May of 2020, what was amazing is that our elite signed on with this reign of terror, this reign of astronomical crime rates, murder rates, buildings being looted, burned, businesses being destroyed. And Fortune 500 companies were funding this. They were funding Black Lives Matter. They were funding terrorism. they were supporting the destruction of our society and this massive rates of crime. So what the heck is going on in your society when your elites are all on board with seemingly the trashing of large parts of your society?
There are elderly, low-income people on crutches there. We don't feel safe around them. But from the perspective of the people who live in East Palestine, it looks a little different. You would think if you live in the United States and you send by force at gunpoint half of your annual pay to Washington, someone in Washington would care when your town is poisoned by a train derailment. Oh, but you thought wrong. Who do you think you are, Ukrainian? Nobody cares about you. Is this Kyiv? No, it's Ohio. Shut up. The Biden administration has other priorities, by the way, like shooting down $300 weather balloons with $400,000 missiles. And yes, apparently they did that. Joe Biden himself admitted it today.
We don't yet know exactly what these three objects were, but nothing right now suggests they were related to China's spy balloon program or that they were surveillance vehicles from any other country. The intelligence community's current assessment is that these three objects were most likely balloons tied to private companies, recreation or research institutions studying weather or conducting other scientific research.
That's the quote. Intelligence community, air quotes now required. That's the intelligence community's assessment. Oh, their kids sent a balloon up and we sent a Sidewinder after it. Mission accomplished.
Okay, so what happens when you're living in a state of exception? How to understand it?
In Schmitt's view, it isn't humanly possible to write law that can completely predict and account for in advance every possible situation. A legal framework must necessarily provide for the means to handle exceptional circumstances, that is, situations beyond what is written in law. In such circumstances, a state of exception exists, whether formally declared or not, in which the law as written can no longer apply. Much as Schmitt experienced while in Munich, states of exception and dictatorships often go hand in hand. The dictator emerges to resolve the state of exception by personifying the law when the law cannot mechanistically provide pre-made decisions. This is the case whether the dictator is put forward by the constitutional state or by the raw will of the people. But the dictator isn't necessarily sovereign. The one with ultimate sovereignty is not he who handles exceptions, but he who decides what counts as an exception. With these concepts, Schmitt had nearly finished building the foundations that would inform his lifelong political theory of the state and the political future of Germany. He was, however, still only a relatively obscure young academic with an intellectual theory for justifying a strong state, but no political influence of his own. This would begin to change as Schmitt moved to take up increasingly prestigious positions over the following years, first in Bonn and then in Berlin. He would there increasingly begin to travel among the intellectuals of Germany's conservative revolution, a loosely affiliated movement of reactionary and conservative nationalists, such as the historian Oswald Spengler and the war hero and arch-conservative writer Ernst Jünger. It was Jünger in particular who, in addition to becoming a close personal friend, would first help propel Schmitt into circles of real political influence. By the start of 1930, Schmitt began to be asked by state ministers to write legal opinions on the justifiable scope of emergency decrees. The economic situation in Germany was collapsing, and the Republic was growing desperate for any means to remain standing. By mid-1932, the Weimar Reich had reached a point of acute crisis, with blood again regularly being spilled in the streets as the Communists, National Socialists, and Reichsauer battled each other ceaselessly. In June, Reich President Hindenburg appointed Franz von Papen as Chancellor, and then in July made him Reich Commissar of Prussia as well, with a military state of exception declared in Berlin and Brandenburg. The Social Democrats challenged the legality of...
Right, so for most people, their primary concern is survival, right? Their primary concern is not the enjoying of their constitutional rights. What people most want to do is survive, and they're usually willing to give up quite a few rights to survive.
...of this unprecedented appointment. And suddenly Schmitt found himself given the task of defending it in court as the crown jurist for the Reich. Schmitt argued that the Reich had a duty to act against parties that represented enemies of the state in order to prevent the outbreak of civil war, and emphasized that Article 48 of the Weimar Constitution provided extremely broad powers for the Reich president to, if necessary, dissolve parliament and rule by presidential decree alone, i.e. through commissary dictatorship. Simultaneously, he would make the argument, formalized in his pamphlet Legality and Legitimacy, 1932, that preserving an equal chance for gaining political power, in fact required that those opposition parties judged to be enemies of the Constitution be legally excluded from political participation. On this, the Federal Republic of Germany to this day maintains that Schmitt was right. With this, Schmitt succeeded in a provisional legal defense of dictatorship, though the case would continue into the autumn of 1932 and end ambiguously. Papen began considering a plan, based on Schmitt's arguments, for the declaration of a state of emergency and general national rule by presidential decree.
So Carl Schmitt wanted to make the two totalitarian extreme parties of both the right and the left, the Nazis and the communists, wanted to make them illegal. In essence, no liberty for the enemies of liberty.
At the same time, Schmitt was tasked with beginning to himself draft a new constitution for Germany. Neither of those plans would unfold as intended, however. The much more radical National Socialist Nazi Party gained ground in summer elections, and the stupid Papen hesitated too long, according to Schmitt. The emergency plan was put on hold, and their new constitution never got off the ground. When Papen was then deposed as chancellor by Kurt von Schleicher in December 1932, Schmitt found himself back outside of power, disgruntled, and giving up hope for the Reich's survival. He began to speak of the need to somehow build not just a strong state, but a total state capable of protecting itself against all enemies, internal and external. When 2 months later, Schleicher's position as chancellor was handed over to Adolf Hitler, through presidential decree, Schmitt would find his chance to follow this path to its end. But back in our present era, it may be worth considering, did a state of exception arrive in America in 2020? More than one politician and public intellectual did call for the exceptional deployment of military force to restore order amid a summer of uncontained violence. But none of these calls were heeded.
Right, that was Senator Tom Cotton. So we definitely went into a state of exception, first with COVID, and then an exception for the rules restricting the spread of COVID. Right, if you're an anti-racist activist, then you got absolved from having to follow the rules that the rest of us had to.
Despite years of loud claims that he deeply desired any possible opportunity to declare a dictatorship, then President Donald Trump either decided against announcing any state of exception in response to the riots, or found himself unable to actually make that sovereign decision. A clear state of exception nonetheless did soon arrive, however, if in response to a threat of an entirely different kind, the COVID-19 pandemic. In the name of protecting public safety, citizens' normal civil liberties, up to and including bodily autonomy and freedom of association, were suspended for an indefinite duration. Normal democratic procedures were superseded. Opposition to these emergency powers was monitored and policed by the national security state. But who decided on this exception? The president? The technocratic national or international public health bureaucracy? A handful of specialized experts and their billionaire backers from around the world? For most people, the answer remains rather hazy. A second, more straightforward justification for maintaining a state of exception soon followed. In the wake of the riot at the Capitol building on January 6, 2021, new executive units were deployed with wide latitude to define and police domestic extremists. State-directed censorship of communications became the prevailing norm. Investigative committees with extraordinary powers were established, and the right of sitting opposition political figures to participate in electoral contests even began to be challenged. A bit over a year and a half later, the President of the United States had, while drenched in blood-red lighting and symbolically flanked by uniformed military personnel, hammered his fists on a podium and delivered a speech claiming that the state was under assault by his political opposition, whom he declared represented an extremism that threatens the very foundations of our republic. His government, he averred, was engaged in a battle for the soul of this nation with this faction, who didn't recognize the will of the people, and who posed a clear and present danger to our democracy. It would, he intoned, be to do ourselves no favor to pretend otherwise. One political party had, in the eyes of the ruling regime, apparently been confirmed as no mere parliamentary debating partner, but as a mortal threat to the continued existence of the state. For Schmitt,
right, so disputes are going to just remain a matter of debate and discussion and argument. All right, when disputes reach a level of intensity that groups' very existence is at stake, then you're in a state of exception. The ordinary rules no longer apply.
Such a sharp existential distinction by the regime between its friends and its enemies would be not only predictable but inevitable, and in fact essential to its interests. Friends and enemies. Schmitt published his most well-known and influential work.
Right, so it's one of the most basic questions when you encounter a stranger, when you're in an unfamiliar situation, right? When the world turns turbulent, right? Are you surrounded by friends or are you surrounded by enemies?
The Concept of the Political in 1927, revising it for republication in 1932. From its opening line, the concept of the state presupposes the concept of the political. Schmitt seeks to define what the political, and therefore the business of the political state, actually is. His answer is straightforward. The political is no less and no more than distinguishing between one's friends and one's enemies. For Schmitt, the essence of politics is not parliamentary debate, or building consensus, or setting tax policy, or even determining who gets to be in charge of running things.
Right, so your enemy is he who threatens your very existence.
Instead, the political is the most intense and extreme antagonism. It is the ever-present possibility of combat that comes into existence whenever one collectivity of people confronts a similar collectivity. Such a divide between groups may begin over religious, moral, cultural, economic, or even completely trivial differences, and continue to always be dressed up in those terms. But all such non-political differences are pushed aside at the precise moment that they become strong enough to group human beings effectively according to friend and enemy, and are thereby subsumed into the political. This moment necessarily arrives if either side finds that it must judge whether the adversary intends to negate his opponent's way of life, and therefore must be repulsed or fought in order to preserve one's own form of existence.
And chat says freedom of association ended with civil rights laws in 1964. I don't think it ended. It certainly was restricted. You increase rights in one area, but you have to do it at the price of reducing rights in another area.
Then the enemy represents the other, the stranger, and it is sufficient for his nature that he is, in an especially intense way, existentially something different and alien, so that in the extreme case, conflicts with him are possible.
Right, so the more tense your situation, right, the more you feel that you're under attack, under threat, that your very survival is at stake, right, the more suspicious you're going to feel towards strangers. Right, being at ease with strangers requires a genuine feeling of well-being on your own part. But when the pressure increases, when the stress builds, when your own existence is at stake, most people turn against strangers, and Jews, pretty much everywhere they go in the world, they are a stranger.
Friend and enemy must therefore be understood in their concrete and existential sense, not as metaphors or symbols, for they receive their real meaning precisely because they refer to the real possibility of physical killing. War follows from enmity. War is the existential negation of the enemy. If this extremity is not a real possibility, then a distinction between friend and enemy does not yet exist, and so neither does the political. For Schmitt, the concept of the state presupposes the concept of the political because the state as an organized political entity decides for itself the friend-enemy distinction. If some other entity is the one that decides this distinction, the state is no longer the decisive political entity, for if it is no longer the one that decides, then it is no longer sovereign. And given that the obligation of the state is to protect its group from all threats, external and internal, and because this group, by Schmitt's very definition of the political, must be a homogeneously unified collective, then, as long as the state is a political entity, this requirement for internal peace compels it in critical situations to decide upon the domestic enemy, which is why every state provides, therefore, some kind of formula for the declaration of an internal enemy. And no amount of moralistic hesitancy or liberal obfuscations about a politically neutral state and long delay the need to make this decision, Schmitt says, because everywhere in political history, in foreign as well as domestic politics, the incapacity or the unwillingness to make this distinction is a symptom of the political end.
Right. So when your life isn't at stake, right, when your group isn't, fighting for its survival, when you're not under threat, then you can afford to make all sorts of other distinctions aside from the friend-enemy distinction. You can distinguish between the morally righteous, the morally wicked. You can distinguish between the aesthetic and the unaesthetic. You can have all sorts of ways of dividing people up. But when your existence is at stake, all right, the primary distinction becomes the friend-enemy distinction.
For if a people no longer possess the energy or the will to maintain itself in the sphere of politics, the latter will not thereby vanish from the world. Only a weak people will disappear.
Right. So does Israel have a right to exist? Do Jews have a right to exist? Do any group have a right to exist? Does any nation state have a right to exist? No, unless you want to take a leap of faith. All right. Your existence depends upon your willingness to defend what you have. Right? If you're not willing to defend what you have, to take up arms if necessary, to do whatever is necessary to survive, then you're not going to be around very long in this world.
For the state and the statesman, the sole remaining question then is always whether such a friend and enemy grouping is really at hand, regardless of which human motives have brought it about. And political thought and political instinct prove them